The deep woods were a place of shadows and secrets, especially under a moon that was just a sliver of silver in the vast, black sky. It was in these ancient woods that a great and terrible struggle had taken place. Rafe, the alpha of the mighty Nightfang pack, was a man of immense strength and unwavering command. But on this night, strength had not been enough. The rival Bloodclaw pack, cunning and cruel, had set a trap, ambushing him far from the safety of his own borders. Now the forest floor, cool and damp with night dew, was his bed. Each breath was a sharp, fiery pain in his chest, a reminder of the deep claw marks that ran across his torso. His leg, twisted and bleeding from a fall during his desperate escape, throbbed with a steady, sickening rhythm. The world swam in and out of focus, the tall, dark pine trees seeming to sway and dance above him. He was alpha, a leader, a warrior, but in that moment he was utterly alone and dying. Miles away, in a small, cozy cottage that seemed to hug the edge of the forest, a woman named Selene was stirring a pot of soup over a crackling fire. She was a creature of quiet routines, having chosen the solitude of the woods over the noise and bustle of the town. People there never understood her, always whispering about the quiet girl who preferred the company of trees and animals to their chatter. Here, in her little home filled with books and drying herbs, she was at peace. As the first light of dawn began to paint the sky in soft shades of pink and orange, she pulled on her warm cloak, took her woven basket and stepped outside. The morning air was crisp and clean, perfect for gathering the special roots and leaves that grew in the mossy clearings. She hummed a soft, tuneless melody to herself, her boots making almost no sound on the soft earth. It was a scent that first caught her attention, a sharp, coppery smell that was terribly out of place among the fresh smells of pine and damp soil. Selene paused, her brow furrowed. Then she heard it, a low, pained sound, more a rumble of suffering than a true groan. Fear, cold and immediate, trickled down her spine. Wild animals were common here, and a wounded one was the most dangerous kind. But her feet, as if with a mind of their own, carried her forward, pushing aside a thick curtain of ferns. What she saw made her gasp and her hand fly to her mouth. It was a wolf, but unlike any she had ever imagined. It was massive, its fur a mix of stormy gray and charcoal black, matted and dark with blood. Its sides heaved with the effort to breathe, and its golden eyes, clouded with pain, looked directly at her. For a long, terrifying moment, they stared at each other. The wolf was magnificent, even near death, and Selene's fear was suddenly washed away by a wave of overwhelming pity. She knew she could not leave him. Dropping her basket, she rushed to his side. "Sure, it's all right," she whispered, her voice trembling but gentle. "I'm not going to hurt you." The wolf flinched as she touched his fur, but he did not snap or growl. It was as if he could sense her intention. The problem was his size. He was far too heavy for her to carry. Thinking quickly, Selene ran back to her cottage and returned with a thick woolen blanket from her bed. She spread it on the ground next to the great beast. "I need you to help me," she coaxed, pushing and pulling with all her might, trying to roll him onto the blanket. It was an exhausting, messy struggle, but finally, with a last great heave, he was on. Grasping the corners of the blanket, Selene began the long, slow, arduous drag back to her home, her muscles burning with the strain. Once inside, she worked with a frantic, focused energy. She fetched warm water and clean cloths, carefully cleaning the dirt and blood from his wounds. She used her knowledge of herbs, crushing some into a paste to help fight infection and brewing others into a tea that would ease pain and bring sleep. All the while she talked to him, her voice a soft, steady murmur. She told him about the birds that visited her window, about the silly squirrel that tried to steal from her vegetable patch, about anything and everything to let him know he was safe. As she worked, gently tending to him, the wolf's tense body began to relax. His breathing grew a little less ragged, and his watchful, pained eyes slowly closed in an exhausted sleep. Selene sat back on her heels, her own body aching, and watched him. A strange feeling of connection, of rightness, settled over her. This wild, beautiful creature was now in her care. The first thing Rafe felt was warmth. It was a deep, soothing warmth that seeped into his bones, a stark contrast to the cold, hard ground of the forest. Then came the smell, a comforting mix of wood smoke, drying herbs, and something uniquely sweet like wildflowers. It was a good smell, a safe smell. He tried to move, and a jolt of white-hot pain shot through his leg and side, making him groan. His eyes fluttered open, and he found himself staring at the wooden beams of a low ceiling. This was not the forest. Panic, cold and sharp, cut through the fog in his mind. Where was he? He tried to sit up, to summon his strength, but his body felt heavy and useless as a sack of stones. His movements were clumsy, and with a grunt of pain, he tumbled from the low cot, landing on the rough-hewn floor with a thud. The sound brought Selene running from the other room. She saw the man, a tall, powerfully built man with tousled dark hair and confused stormy gray eyes, struggling on her floor. For a second she froze. The wolf was gone. And in its place was him. The pieces clicked together in her mind. The stories she had heard whispered about the people of the woods, the shapeshifters, were true. This was a werewolf. Her patient was a man. He looked up at her, his expression a mix of pain, pride, and deep wariness. "Who are you?" he growled, his voice rough and weak but still holding a note of command. Selene took a steadying breath, pushing down her own shock. She walked over and knelt beside him, not touching him yet. "My name is Selene," she said, her voice calm and even. "You're in my home. You were badly hurt. I've been taking care of you." She reached out to help him, but he flinched away from her hand. "Don't," he muttered, trying and failing to push himself up on his own. Selene's gentle expression hardened into one of firm resolve. She was not afraid of him. "You are in no condition to be proud," she stated, her tone leaving no room for argument. "You can barely move. Now you can either let me help you back into this bed or you can lie on the cold floor. It's your choice." Rafe stared at her, stunned into silence. No one, not even his most trusted warriors, spoke to him like that. He was the alpha. He gave the orders. But looking into her clear, determined eyes, he found he had no fight left in him. With a defeated sigh, he finally nodded. It took all of Selene's strength to get him back onto the cot, her body pressed against his for a brief, startling moment as she heaved him up. Once he was settled, she brought him a cup of water. He drank greedily, the cool liquid soothing his parched throat. "Thank you," he said, the words seeming foreign on his tongue. He wouldn't look at her. "My name is Rafe." It wasn't the whole truth, but it was a piece of it, offered as a truce. Selene simply nodded, accepting it. "Rest, Rafe," she said softly. "You're safe here." And as he lay back, watching her move about the small cottage, a new and confusing feeling began to bloom in his chest, warm and persistent, pushing back against the cold grip of his pain. It was a feeling he had been told he would one day feel, a pull towards one specific person in the entire world. A pull towards his fated mate. And it was directed at this brave, stubborn human woman who had just ordered an alpha around. He closed his eyes, a turmoil of fear and wonder swirling inside him. This changed everything. The days that followed wove a new and fragile rhythm into the quiet life of Selene's cottage. Rafe, the mysterious wolfman, was a difficult patient. The alpha spirit within him chafed at his weakness, at the confinement of the small, peaceful rooms. He was used to wide open spaces and the unquestioning obedience of his pack. Here, he was dependent on the kindness of a human woman who was not the least bit intimidated by his scowls or his stubborn silence. Yet, as his body slowly began to mend, fed by Selene's hearty soups and soothed by her herbal poultices, the walls of his resistance began to crumble. It started with conversation. On the third day, as Selene sat by the hearth mending a tear in her cloak, she began to talk. Not about anything important, but about the small, simple things that made up her world. She told him about the fox family that lived in a den behind the big oak tree, and how the kids were just beginning to venture out and play. She spoke of her love for the stars, and how she would often lie on the grass at night, trying to learn the constellations from a tattered old book. Rafe listened, at first in silence, propped up on his cot. Her voice was a soft, melodic counterpoint to the howling wind of his own life, a life filled with duty, battle, and politics. He found himself looking forward to the sound of it. Then he began to talk back. He told her he came from a large family, though he carefully avoided the word pack. He spoke of a stern but loving father and a mother with a laugh that could light up a room, both now gone. He shared stories of getting into trouble as a boy, of climbing trees that were too high and swimming in lakes that were too cold. He never mentioned his title, his power, or the constant, simmering war with the blood claw. With Selene he could just be Rafe. In these moments the air in the cottage felt different, charged with a gentle, growing warmth. Sometimes, when Selene would hand him a bowl of stew, her fingers would brush against his. A simple, accidental touch, but it sent a jolt like a spark from the fireplace straight up his arm. He would see a faint blush creep into her cheeks and knew she felt it too. It was the mate bond, whispering to him, growing stronger with every shared smile, every quiet moment. One afternoon, Selene was outside in her small garden, pulling weeds from around her vegetable plants. The sun was warm on her back and she was humming, her thoughts drifting to the man inside her home. She was falling for him, this gruff, secretive man with eyes that held storms and a smile that was rare but brilliant. It was a terrifying, wonderful feeling. A sudden crunch of a heavy footstep on the gravel path made her look up. Two men stood at the edge of her property. They were large, with hard eyes and an air of violence that made the hair on her arms stand up. They were not from the nearby town. "You girl," one of them grunted, his voice like grinding stones. "We're looking for someone. A big man may be hurt. Or a large wolf. You seen anything unusual around here?" Selene's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. These were the ones who had hurt Rafe. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to hide. But the thought of Rafe, still weak and defenseless inside her cottage, steeled her. She forced her face into a mask of calm confusion. She stood up, brushing the dirt from her knees, and met the man's gaze without flinching. "A wolf?" she said, her voice remarkably steady. "I hear them howling at night sometimes, but I stay inside. It's safer that way." "And a hurt man?" "No, sir. It's just me out here. Haven't seen a soul for weeks." She made a show of looking concerned. "Is someone lost? Should I send for the town sheriff if he comes by this way?" The men exchanged a look, their suspicion palpable. They scanned her small, simple cottage and her innocent-looking garden. Finally, the first man grunted again. "No. Don't trouble yourself. You see anything, you keep quiet. This doesn't concern you." They turned and melted back into the trees as silently as they had arrived. Selene stood frozen for a full minute after they were gone, her legs trembling. Then she rushed inside, locking the door behind her and leaning against it, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Rafe was already on his feet, his body tense, his eyes blazing with a feral light. He had heard everything from the window. "Blood Claw," he snarled, the name a curse. He looked at Selene, at her pale face and wide eyes, and the anger in him was suddenly eclipsed by a fierce, protective wave of something else. She had stood there, a lone human, and lied to two dangerous werewolves to protect him. She had been brave and brilliant. He crossed the room in 2 long strides, stopping just in front of her. The air between them crackled. "You were amazing," he breathed, his voice low and thick with emotion. He reached out, his movements slow and deliberate, and gently tucked a loose strand of her hair behind her ear. His knuckles brushed the soft skin of her cheek, and the touch was like lightning. Selene's breath hitched. She looked up into his stormy eyes and saw not just an alpha, but a man looking at a woman he cared for. The space between them vanished. He didn't kiss her, not yet, but the moment was more intimate than any kiss. It was a promise, a question, and a confession all held in that single, charged touch. He leaned his forehead against hers, their breaths mingling. "Selene," he whispered, her name a prayer on his lips. He wanted to tell her everything. The words, "I am the Alpha and you are my mate," were on the tip of his tongue. But the memory of the Blood Claw scouts, the ever-present danger, sealed his lips. To claim her would be to paint a target on her back. He pulled away, the conflict raging in his eyes, and the unspoken truth hung heavily in the cozy room. After that day, a new, unspoken sadness settled over Selene. The closeness they had shared felt like it had a timer on it. She knew, with a sinking certainty, that he would leave. He was a leader, a man with responsibilities in a world she couldn't fully understand. Her heart ached with the knowledge that the man she was falling in love with could never stay in her simple cottage forever. She began to pull away just a little, building small walls around her heart to prepare for the inevitable goodbye. She busied herself with chores, her smiles becoming a little more polite, a little less frequent. Rafe noticed the change, and it pained him more than any physical wound. He wanted to tear down those walls, to promise her he would never leave, but he knew he couldn't. The real world was waiting, and it was a world of teeth and claws. The sound came a week later, just as dusk was painting the sky in shades of purple and orange. It was the distinct, sharp howl of a wolf, but it wasn't a wild, random cry. It was a call, a signal. Rafe's head snapped up from where he sat by the fire. His body went rigid. Selene, who was washing dishes, froze, her hands still in the water. She knew. She knew without being told that the time had come. A moment later there was a firm, respectful knock on the door. Rafe opened it to reveal a tall, serious-faced man with a warrior's posture. "Marcus," Rafe said, his voice heavy with resignation. The man, Marcus, bowed his head slightly. "Alpha," he said, his voice urgent but low. "The pack is vulnerable. The Blood Claw grow bolder. They are testing our borders every night. We need you. We need our Alpha to come home." Rafe closed his eyes, the weight of his duty settling back onto his shoulders like a heavy cloak. He turned to look at Selene. Her back was to him, but he could see the tension in her shoulders. The cozy, beautiful dream was over. The goodbye was a quiet, painful thing. The warm cocoon of the cottage, which had held them safe for so long, now felt like a beautiful trap from which they both had to break free. Rafe stood by the door, his bag slung over his shoulder. He looked every bit the alpha again, his posture straight, the pain in his eyes masked by a leader's resolve. But when he looked at Selene, that mask threatened to crumble. "Thank you, Selene," he said, his voice low and gravelly with emotion. "For my life. For everything." Selene simply nodded, her arms wrapped tightly around herself as if she were holding her own breaking heart together. She couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. She tried to offer a brave smile, but it was a trembling, fragile thing that didn't reach her tear-filled eyes. She knew he had to go. She knew his world needed him. But that knowledge did nothing to ease the raw, aching hole his departure was tearing in her chest. He turned and followed Marcus into the tree line. Selene watched from the doorway, the cold evening air biting at her skin. She watched his broad back until the shadows of the forest swallowed him whole. The moment he disappeared from view, a single hot tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek. The cottage, once her sanctuary, felt unbearably large and empty. The silence was deafening, broken only by the crackle of the dying fire. This was it. He was gone. And she was alone again. But the forest was not done with its secrets. Rafe and Marcus had not gone more than 100 yards from the cottage when the air shifted. A twig snapped, not by accident but with purpose. Then another. Dark figures emerged from behind the thick trunks of the ancient trees, surrounding them in a deadly, silent circle. The Blood Claw Pack. They had been waiting, patient as spiders, knowing their true prey would eventually have to emerge. Their leader, a hulking brute with a scar across his face, grinned, revealing sharp canines. "We knew you wouldn't be able to stay away from your pack forever, Alpha," he sneered. "And we knew the human woman would lead us to you." Back in the cottage, Selene heard the first snarl. It was a sound of pure hatred and violence that ripped through the peaceful evening. Her blood ran cold. Without a second thought for her own safety, she grabbed the heavy iron poker from the fireplace and ran outside, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm of terror. The scene she stumbled upon was one from her worst nightmares. Marcus was a whirlwind of fury, fighting two wolves at once. But Rafe, was the main target. He fought with the ferocity of a cornered king, but his body was not yet at full strength. His movements, while powerful, were a fraction too slow. He dodged one set of claws only to be struck from the side by another. Selene watched in horror as a massive wolf lunged, its jaws aiming for his throat. Rafe twisted, saving his neck, but the beast's claws sank deep into his side, the same side that had only just begun to heal. A cry of agony was torn from his lips, a sound that would haunt Selene forever. He fell to his knees and then collapsed onto the forest floor. The fighting seemed to pause for a moment, the blood claw wolves sensing their victory. Selene didn't think. She screamed and ran forward, dropping to her knees in the damp leaves and mud, gathering Rafe's head into her lap. "No, no, no," she sobbed, her tears falling onto his pale face. She pressed her hands against the terrible wound in his side, trying to stem the flow of blood that seeped relentlessly between her fingers. "You can't leave me. Please, Rafe, stay with me." Marcus, seeing his alpha fall, let out a roar of despair and redoubled his efforts, holding the remaining enemies at bay in a desperate last stand. Rafe's eyes fluttered open. They were clouded with pain, but they found hers. He looked up at her, at the woman who had saved him, cared for him, and was now holding him as he died. The fear and the pride melted away, leaving only a profound and aching love. He had spent his life being strong, being a leader. In this final moment he could only be honest. He used what little breath he had left, his voice a faint, ragged whisper. "My real name is Rafe. I am the alpha of the Night Fang Pack." He coughed, a dark stain appearing on his lips. Selene leaned closer, her sobs shaking her whole body. "And you, Selene, you are not just the woman who saved me." He reached a trembling hand up to touch her face. "You are my one true love, my fated mate. My heart has always been yours." His hand fell away. His eyes closed. His chest stilled. The great Alpha Rafe was gone. A wail of utter despair tore from Selene's soul. She bent over him, her body shaking with the force of her grief, holding his lifeless form tightly. She had lost him. She had just found him and she had lost him. But as she held him, a strange warmth began to bloom where her skin touched his. It started as a faint glow, a soft, golden light that emanated from her own heart and flowed into his still chest. It was the power of the mate bond, a magic older than the forest itself. He had claimed her with his last truthful breath, and that bond, that profound connection, refused to be broken by something as simple as death. The light grew brighter, enveloping them both in a brilliant, warm aura. Selene watched, awestruck, as the deep, fatal wound on Rafe's side began to knit itself together, the flesh weaving back into place as if commanded by the light itself. Color returned to his face. A shuddering, gasping breath filled his lungs and his eyes flew open. They were no longer clouded with pain, but clear and bright, shining with a love as deep and eternal as the stars. "Selene," he breathed, her name a miracle on his lips. He reached for her, his hand strong and sure now, and cupped her face. And then he finally kissed her. It was not a kiss of gentle exploration, but a kiss of claiming, of promise, of a future nearly lost but now forever found. It was filled with the salt of her tears and the sweet truth of his love. When they finally broke apart, the world around them had changed. The remaining blood-claw wolves, seeing their fallen enemy not only alive but restored by a power they could not comprehend, fled in terror back into the shadows. Marcus stood panting, watching the scene with awe and a deep, reverent joy. Rafe stood, pulling Selene up with him, his arm wrapped firmly around her waist, never wanting to let her go again. He looked at Marcus and then back at the woman who was his savior, his healer, and his destiny. "Come," he said to her, his voice full of a new, unshakable strength. "Come home with me. It's time for my pack to meet their Luna." Selene looked up at him, her heart so full it felt it might burst. She was not just a lonely woman in the woods anymore. She was the fated mate of the Alpha. She had a home, a people, a purpose. She had a love that had literally brought a man back from the brink of death. She nodded, a true radiant smile finally lighting up her face. Hand in hand they walked away from the cottage, not as a human and a werewolf, but as two halves of a single soul, finally and completely whole. If your heart is yearning for more tales of fated love, epic battles, and bonds that defy even death, then your pack awaits you here. Subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss a story. Our next journey into a world of romance and magic is just around the corner, and we don't want you to miss a single moment.